Morning, everyone. My name is Paballo Masite. I'm from the National Intellectual Property Management Office, NIPMO in short. I'll be here to share the interventions that NIPMO is doing in relation to supporting innovation and business generation within South Africa. Let me start by elaborating on the mandate of NIPMO. As some of you may be aware, NIPMO is not an entity on its own. It's a specialized service delivery unit within the Department of Science and Innovation. NIPMO was actually established in 2010, but it was as a result of the implementation of the act that in short, we call it the IPR Act, Intellectual Property Rights from Publicly Financed Research and Development Act of 2008. So in terms of the act, the objectives of the act was to say that IP which emanates from publicly financed research and development should be identified, protected, utilized, and commercialized for the benefit of the people of South Africa. So again, the act is very specific to say that human ingenuity and creativity must be acknowledged and rewarded. So there's a very greater link between innovation and IP, because IP is one of the tools that protects your innovation. So there's no way you can speak about IP without excluding innovation in the whole process. So as NIPMO, we don't do the actual identification, the protection and utilization of IP. So that kind of IP gets reported to us. But then the responsibility or the greater responsibility lies within what we call offices of technology transfer. So those offices, the act says that after the establishment of NIPMO, we as a department and as NIPMO, we are supposed to assist institutions. I'll name them as institutions, and institutions, the umbrella term covers universities and science councils, because those are the ones who are responsible for research and development within the country. So NIPMO was to assist those institutions with the establishment of those offices of technology transfer to ensure that the objects of the act are met. In addition to that, in the act, it makes provision for the implementation of what we call the IP fund, whereby we fund a rebate for the cost incurred in the protection and maintenance of IP. So who does the act apply to? The IPR Act that I've been referring to. The act came into play in August of 2010. So everybody who has conducted research and development after the 2nd of August 2010, using public funds, then the act will be applicable. So if you've done your research and development, but you did not use public funds, and public funds, it's very broad. It can come from the DSI, the DTI, or whoever else, as long as it comes from the South African tax base, then we deem that to be a public funds. And if your mandate was to develop research and to conduct research and development, then the IPR Act applies, or it would be applicable to you, and you'll have much greater interaction with NIPMO, because NIPMO also came about as a result of the IPR Act. Colleagues, we are having a bit of a delay, but we'll be with you just now.
Can you tell us how many universities and institutions have OTTs?
As of this year, 2023, all university, publicly funded universities and science council have an OTT or an OTT function. So the size of the office depends on the R&D outputs and outcomes. So in other instances, there are more than, let's say, on average, maybe 10 or so. And others you might find it's 2 or 3 individuals within the office. So depending on their capacity to do research and development, that's what informs how big the size of the OTT will be, or they will have a dedicated one person or something like that, especially for the new institutions, your University of it's sort of like those ones. Yeah. Yes. As I continue, I just want to highlight the functions or what NIPMO does as an implementing office of the IPR Act. We have 3 different directorates within NIPMO: regulatory and compliance, advisory and support, and funds and incentives directorate. Within regulatory and compliance, you remember, if you recall that I said that if there's any intellectual property which comes from research and development, it gets reported to NIPMO. We keep a database of that intellectual property, so it gets updated to us, and then every 6 months, the institutions are expected to update NIPMO in terms of what is the status of that intellectual property. If there's any commercialization, what have been accomplished in terms of commercializing that IP, revenues. So that is the function of regulatory and compliance. And the other thing is that there are certain IP transactions that you would ideally require NIPMO's approval before you proceed with them. For instance, if you want to abandon the IP which you had initially registered, you'll have to inform NIPMO or to ask NIPMO's permission, but then indicate what were your reasons for that, and we will evaluate and either give you a go-ahead, or if, for instance, you want to license your IP offshore exclusively, then you need to motivate why you are saying there's no commercialization partner within South Africa for you to license that IP. So that it's handled within the Regulatory and Compliance Directorate. Within the advisory and support, that's where the majority of the work pertaining to awareness, educating institutions, capacitating them takes place. So we have partnered with several organizations, both locally and outside the country. The reason for that is not just for building capacity within OTTs, but also to reach a broader network of communities, so that they are aware of IP and how to commercialize or how to protect and stuff like that. So we work mostly with the World Intellectual Property Organization, who has sponsored a lot of our programs. And we also have expanded beyond your normal traditional universities and science council to also roll out the awareness sessions towards the TVET colleges, so that even if there's no patent which can come from there, but at least they know that there are different forms of IP which links to innovation. Because then if you only focus on research-intensive universities, there's likelihood that you might leave others with good innovations behind, or their innovations, they just get lost within the system. We've also partnered with the Swiss IP office in terms of rolling out commercialization for SMME training. So that one is they provide sponsorship for sponsoring SMMEs, but then NIPMO will sponsor about 10 also SMMEs so that they sit together. But the aim is to look at commercialization of IP, not necessarily just on the protection, because I think we've tried to look at protection, and most of our programs have looked at IP protection and identification, but we are still lagging behind in terms of commercialization of intellectual property. So we're trying to look at different partners who can assist us in that instance. And then within NIPMO also, there's funds and incentives directorate. So that directorate we look at, within NIPMO, there's two main funding instruments: the OTT support fund. The OTT support fund is actually aimed at establishing or maintaining offices of technology transfers within institutions. So we assist them in terms of salaries for the individuals who are placed there, their training needs, if they have workshops and other events, it falls within the OTT support fund mandate. And then, as I've indicated before, we also have the IP fund, where we give a rebate of up to 50% of what the institution has spent in terms of IP protection and maintenance. So unfortunately, both funds are only applicable to institutions, which is your universities and science council. And then when it comes to incentives, because of limitations in terms of budget, we try to also partner with other institutions so that we don't have a big budget within NIPMO, but at least we trying to acknowledge and reward IP creators within the NSI by partnering, for instance, with the NSTF, the NGAP Awards with the Innovation Hub. And also, I think 2-3 years back, the DHET introduced a subsidy for innovation outputs. So we sit in that committee, although the funding comes from DHET, but we assisted them in terms of drafting the guidelines, evaluating the innovation outputs, and then give them a recommendation, and then they pay the institution themselves. So we also give recognition certificates towards IP creators based at institutions. One of our key partners is the CIPC. So the CIPC, they are responsible for assisting in protecting, or that's why you apply for protection of intellectual property. So they have what we call the Inventors Assistance Program. And that one, it's for everyone. So irrespective of whether you are from a university or from an SMME perspective, if you need assistance in terms of funding for protecting your intellectual property, then you write a proposal, and we sit in the committee as well within the CIPC in terms of that Inventor Assistance Program. Next slide. So here is just the stats of what we have achieved so far in terms of the OTT support fund. OTT support fund, we have over 153 contract positions which were placed at institutions from when NIPMO started until April 2022. And then 2-3 years ago, we also expanded the OTT support fund to include what we call tech transfer activities. So if you want to do your feasibility study, infringement opinion, or small things that doesn't require a lot of money, then you would apply for the OTT support fund. it was started in 2019. So far, in terms of the IP fund, over 400 million was spent over 11 years by institutions. So how we know is when they apply. So if the institution doesn't apply, then we will not know how much they have spent. Even if you apply, there's certain requirements that they would have to meet. And then if approved, actually it's very simple in terms of those requirements. It's who owns that intellectual property. The intellectual property must be owned by the institution. Of course, the IP creators or the inventors must be acknowledged as the IP creators within that IP. And then it must have been reported to NIPMO. So the updates which I was talking about, that if, for instance, you filed a provisional patent application and then you went to file in other territories like your US and it gets granted, and then you come back and commercialize or sign a license agreement with another party, you still need to update NIPMO in terms of what is happening with that IP. So if that IP is not reported, then we'll have a problem, because then we need to know what is happening there. So those are the main requirements that we look at. And if all of those are met, we give you a rebate of up to 50%. Yeah, you can move on to the next slide. I think in summary, it just sums up what I've been talking about, why the OTT office or function was created to ensure that the IPR Act legislative mandate is met. So presently, in all South African universities, including the science councils, they have an OTT or an OTT function. And as indicated, the IP fund and the OTT is still operational. But then the OTTs, they play a very, very big role in ensuring that from the research and development, it gets translated towards commercialization of a product or a service. So we give much support to those offices, and it can never be enough. So we try as much as possible to link them with other partners within the NSI so that they are not left behind. Or you'll find other institutions, they are still, especially the previously historical disadvantaged institutions, they are still lagging behind, so that they catch up with the others. We provide as much support and hand-holding to them as opposed to the other big institutions. We can move on to. So in 2019-20, NIPMO and the DSI, they did a survey. They called it the IP and TT survey. I didn't look at all the elements of the outcomes of that survey, but I took a snippet of what is relevant for today. So in terms of IP transactions and startup or spin-outs from the institutions who responded to those survey, and I must say it's all of them, publicly funded research and science councils and universities. So it looks like the number of licenses which are concluded are increasing as opposed to the first survey, which took place, I think, around about 2015. So there has been an increase in terms of the licenses, with up to 290 plus license agreements reported in terms of that survey. And IP transaction revenue, which was generated by the institutions themselves, there was also an increase. So far, some people might say it's not a big number, but it shows that there's something which is coming up from the research and development within institutions, with more than 185 million revenue generated from from licenses. And then 100 spin-outs or startups were formed since 2008. So as spin-out and spin-off are created, we always hope that the jobs that are created, they'll be sustained in the long term so that those companies, they don't fall. Or they are self-sustainable in the long run. So there's been also a good response in terms of the startup and the spin-outs, which came from universities based on the survey results. Yeah, we can live on this one. I think as I'm about to wrap up, there's still a lot of work that needs to happen within the NSI, within publicly financed institution. One of the things that was articulated was that there's still a funding gap in terms of technology development funds or commercialization or early commercialization funding that is required by universities, by science councils, and also some of them, they've indicated that one of the challenges that they are having is that they don't get as much support from senior management as they would love to. But it's an ongoing discussion so that at least we are on the same page with everyone, because it doesn't help for other partners to come on board, but if the senior management doesn't assist or doesn't provide the necessary support, then it demoralizes the team and the offices at large. So as a concluding remark from my side, as indicated, you can never do more. You can never have more awareness. So the more you preach about innovation, the more you make people, the communities aware. Sometimes they just need simple English without the legal jargons and everything else. And it's not a one entity's responsibilities. All of us within the NSI who is supposed to work together, so that we also leave that thing of working in silos. NIPMO is responsible for this. I don't care about what is happening next door. But actually, if we put our heads together, we put our resources together, we can see a much outer outputs, or we can reach or achieve much more than what we've been able to achieve to date. And yes, funding also remains a challenge, but I guess this one will also depend on how innovative we are, or how effective and efficient we are with the little that we have, so that we stretch it as much as possible to ensure that that small cent that we have, we see something at the end of the day. I think that's all from my side. Thank you.